Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Black Eagles podcast. Today we're talking about Shinji Kagawa with the Japan Times' own Dan Orlowitz. Dan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Dan, and for doing this, of course. Before we get more into Kagawa, maybe tell people a little bit about yourself. You're working for the Japan Times since the beginning of the season. What's your function there at the Japan Times?
I joined in August of 2018 as on the sports desk, basically the main football writer and helping to put together the sports section basically every week and sharing Japanese sports with the world because we have a lot of it coming up. The Rugby World Cup later this year, the Olympics next year, Olympics and Paralympics, I should say, and all that sort of good stuff. So I covered the J-League, Japan's national team, and basically football in any interesting form that happens to show up on my radar.
Yeah, and of course people can follow you on Twitter, and I think most people who follow Japanese football and don't speak Japanese but do speak English probably already do. So you covered the World Cup, I think, as well in the summer, and of course the Asia Cup recently that only just finished, right?
I wasn't. Unfortunately, I wasn't on location at either tournament. It's very difficult to get World Cup credentials within the Japanese media, even though Japan actually and regularly sends one of the largest contingents in the world to the World Cup. I believe that this year they sent about 100 or 150 members of the media. That includes writers, photographers, and TV crew. And I believe the only countries that send more photographers were England and Brazil, if I remember my notes from the briefing at the time. So it's tough competition. I'm disappointed that I couldn't make the Asian Cup this year. I actually went to the 2015 edition in Australia 4 years ago and had a blast. It's been a busy year for the national team and all that stuff, and especially as we are in the middle of a rebuilding sort of cycle.
Yeah, and we saw, of course, Japan reached the final of the Asia Cup and unfortunately lost 3-0 to Qatar. But one of the big names that was absent was, of course, Shinji Kagawa. He was not at the Asia Cup with Japan. Yuto Nagatomo of Galatasaray was there. Now, do you think that Kagawa is...
Sorry, can we go back and you might want to redo that because it was 3-1 was the final.
3-1, oh my
yeah.
God. Yeah, okay.
Japan was the first team to score against Qatar in the tournament.
Okay. Yeah, that's no problem. We'll
yeah.
Just, so the scoreline was 3-1 and not 3-0 as I had thought. I tuned out at 3-0. That's probably why I thought that.
It was pretty close. It was 2-0 at the end of the first half, and then it was 2-1, and then it was 3-1. I think at 3-1 we all knew it was over. But no, it was full credit to Qatar. They were an incredible team and absolutely deserved it.
It's really surprising for me that they. Japan kind of is the biggest team in Asia, at least as the perception, I think, in Europe. And of course, South Korea had that upcoming. They had an amazing World Cup in 2002, where Japan did well as well, of course. But Japan is kind of the mainstay when it comes from the Asian continent. If we're not counting Australia, that always tends to do well at tournaments. So I was very surprised to see that Qatar ended up winning. But Kagawa, that's what we're here to talk about, and he wasn't
Absolutely.
at the Asia Cup. Do you think that at age 29, almost 30, he's going to turn 30 years old in March, do you see him still having a big role for the Japanese squad going forward? Should he regain his form, play regular football at Beşiktaş or elsewhere, for example?
If he does get his mojo back, I can see him getting back into the thick of things. The problem is that he's really been, in terms of his national team form, he was very inconsistent, with the exception of the World Cup itself last summer. It was sort of, we were not expecting good things at all from Kagawa. And there was actually a fair to reasonable expectation that he would miss the tournament entirely, until Vahid Halilhodžić got fired as head coach, and until Akira Nishino named his squad of 23. We weren't actually sure if he would be selected, and there were some injury issues and that sort of thing. To answer your question more directly, yeah, if he gets his sense of the game back, if he gets more playing time in Turkey, and either he stays with Beşiktaş or goes to another European club, I think that he can play an important role as the elder statesman. I'm not sure that I want to see him in the starting role, but I think that he would be great as, a 60th or 70th minute super sub, that sort of thing. Just because I do feel, in terms of Japan's national team, if you look, we basically had the same team for 2 straight cycles. The cycle that began after the 2010 World Cup, under Alberto Zaccheroni, went to the World Cup in Brazil, and then Vahid sort of tried to force a generational change, and he didn't quite get it to work. And then in the end, Nishino just took sort of a patchwork that included a lot of the trusted veterans that he knew as technical director to Russia, and it worked. But you do still need to bring in the youth and put in the fresh blood, and the good players need to retire at some point. That's just sort of how it is. So I think if Kagawa wants to, he can still make an impact for the national team, but I don't think that he should necessarily be the star of the team like he and Keisuke Honda were for these last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, and of course there's new rising stars on the horizon with, you already mentioned him. Did you mention him off air, or since I started recording I think you mentioned him off air, but Shoya Nakajima, who of course I just think made a huge move to Qatar, if I'm not mistaken, for 35 million. I think that news trickled in the other day that he moved to Qatar, and I was very shocked by that. I thought he was going to...
Yeah, okay, there's some weirdness there, because there were some rumors that Wolverhampton Wanderers were going to try to sign him. I believe that they weren't willing to pay what Portimonense were offering. And, of course, a rich Qatari club is usually going to have enough money to pay whatever they want.
The same owners as Paris Saint-Germain, so there might be some possibility.
Yeah, there's some rumors that this whole thing is for half a year, and then he'll be moved on to Paris. But then again, the question is, would he be, would he have a good shot at the starting lineup, or would he just be playing second fiddle to Neymar? It's tough. I wasn't at all impressed with Nakajima's recent blog post where he said that he's more, he wants to enjoy his career and have fun on the pitch, and he wants to be able to live somewhere that he feels comfortable in. Which, look, when one of the most anticipated young stars of the current national team generation says that he isn't super fixated on playing in the UEFA Champions League, that's a bit of a red flag. So we're going to have to wait to see. They've only got about 7 or 8 games left in the season, so I don't know. It's all a bit suspicious, and if he's decided to cash in on a very promising career for a payday that will set him up for the rest of his life, it's a loss for the national team. And that's really all you can say. But we still have Ritsu Doan, we still have Takumi Minamino.
Kamada, who's been impressive in Belgium.
Daiji Kamada, we've got Takahiro Tomoyasu, the center back who's also playing with Kamada in Belgium. We've got a lot of promising youngsters rising up, but coming up with a really strong attack has always been one of Japan's biggest challenges. When Kagawa, Honda, and Okazaki were on top of their game, they were just on fire and it was unbelievable and they could do some really awesome things. But when they didn't have that confidence, which Kagawa frequently lacked, especially in the last 2 years or so of the national team.
And at Dortmund.
And at Dortmund, they just couldn't get it together. So it's the problem with Japanese players that they tend to run very hot or very cold. Mm-hmm. And there's probably some cultural pressure there. There's, I think any footballer will deal with the same sort of issues. But with Kagawa especially, he's never quite... I think that in some ways the Manchester United move broke him. And the pieces went back together, but they never quite fit as well.
Yeah. I was actually speaking to my good friend Sinan Schwarding, of course, my co-host on the podcast here, and he lived in Japan for I believe a year.
Okay.
So he's really big on Japan. He was super thrilled with this Kagawa move. We were both really hoping for this in the summer. I myself, I have to say, I fell completely in love with the Japanese national team at the World Cup. As you know, I'm from Belgium, so when I was actually watching the Japan-Belgium match, and when Belgium scored the 3-2, believe it or not, I was sitting there in this. I have never experienced this in my life before, where I couldn't be happy because I felt so bad for the Japanese national team because they were so good in that match, and they didn't deserve to lose it. And I don't know. It was really, really, really weird feeling how torn I was when that goal went in. Just because I don't know. I wasn't so impressed with Japan in the group stages, especially not the first game, I think. But then that match against Belgium and I think their third group stage game, I believe they were really impressive too. And just the work ethic and all of that. Japan is such a likable team. The players are likable. I think Kagawa is someone that I've liked for many years. But like you said, and we spoke about this, Sinan and I then, that the Manchester United move kind of seems to... He never was the same again, because before that he really was one of the three big Dortmund stars. He was like the next big thing coming in the European football scene. Then he went to Manchester United, didn't really pan out. He was kind of a bit player there. Then he went back to Dortmund, but he never managed to capture that status again that he had the first time around. Despite the fact that he was still quite young when he went back. I think he was only like 25 or so, or 26 when he went back to Dortmund. But he hasn't been the same since. And Dortmund, of course, now I think for both him and Dortmund, it's kind of done. The chapter is over. I believe you sent me some articles at the beginning of the season where he did say that he was looking for a new challenge in his career, that he wanted something new, a change of scenery. We all, of course, know that Spain's on his bucket list, has been on his bucket list, but that move to Spain didn't materialize in the summer. I think that was probably also kind of why he was probably hesitant to take the Beşiktaş offer, because I spoke to you about this in the summer, where Beşiktaş were trying to make this huge splash into the Japanese market, and Kagawa was probably their big key component in that plan to try and expand into Japan, because they do see that as the Japanese market. They see that as such an untapped possibility. And even one of the Beşiktaş board members the other day, Shafak Mahmut Yazıcıoğlu, said some stuff towards the media. He said, look, for us, Japan is just something that offers so much possibilities. It's really difficult right now, especially in Turkey with the financial state of the country, to get good sponsorship deals. Beşiktaş, of course, have some major sponsorship deals already in place with Vodafone, which is the biggest sponsorship deal in Turkey. But it's difficult to get good sponsorship deals, and they do see Japan as a potential market where they could perhaps get sponsors in. And Kagawa was, I think, a big part of that plan. Didn't happen in the summer because I think he still wanted to see if he could go to Spain. But that didn't happen. Didn't happen now in January either. It was deadline day when he arrived and eventually ended up signing on a 6-month loan for Beşiktaş. He was rumored to go to Monaco, but that didn't happen. So I think for Kagawa, I kind of have the impression that it was really he was really hesitant for this move, and we spoke about this off air a little bit as well, where I think there's a lot of similarities with the cultures, Japan, Turkey. Of course, also a lot of differences. But I was kind of surprised that he was so hesitant, and I think also the fact that this move is only a 6-month loan. There's no option to buy, as far as we know. And I think it's very much a case of he wants to see if he can settle in Turkey and if he can move forward. But I've been rambling on and talking a lot now, Dan, so I do apologize for that. But I do want to ask you, when we see this move, how big is this, you think, in Japan? What was the impact? How widely was it reported? Was it huge news? What kind of perspective can you give us on that?
Well, I think you touched on a lot of interesting points, and I'll just sort of try to tackle them one by one. If you want to start with how big the move was, it was sort of really weird timing for that move to happen, just because it happened the day of the Asian Cup final, and I think that by the time most Japanese football fans woke up and read that Kagawa had gone to Istanbul and joined Beşiktaş, they were still nursing the hangover of that 3-1 loss, and that will put a damper on anyone's day. So I think that it's hard to say, because he's fallen off of a lot of fans' radar. He is, without a doubt, one of the most popular Japanese players who's currently active. If you talk about this World Cup squad in terms of who the two biggest players were, it was Honda and Kagawa. It's always been Honda and Kagawa. And I think that if you want to talk about their role in the Japanese zeitgeist, Keisuke Honda was always the bad boy. Like, he was sort of the rebel with the fashion and the Rolexes or the Omegas or whatever on both wrists, and the cryptic comments, and he was a bit of a weirdo, but he was a rebel, and and people took to that. And meanwhile, Kagawa was the boy that moms want their girls to bring home with them, so to speak.
Yeah. He just looks like a... Yeah, I mean, he comes across like that. We also, in the brief period that we've seen him now, experienced him now at Beşiktaş, is just... He comes, like I said before, with the Japanese players, the Japanese national team, that they come across extremely likely, and I think he kind of epitomizes that. So I definitely see what you mean there with.
Yeah, he's humble, and he's got a good image. Like, he's never gonna get I think that to contrast him with the Japanese player who, as you mentioned, is currently in Turkey. If you look at Yuto Nagatomo, who is not brash, a bit brash, but he's got a personality, and that personality really served Nagatomo well when I remember watching from the stands his rookie season at SC Tokyo, and you could tell that he was going to set the world on fire. Like, he was an amazing defender. I still, to this day, tell the story of him punking Hulk in the April 2008 Tokyo Derby. Like, think about that. You had Yuto Nagatomo going up against Hulk in the Tokyo Derby in 2008. The J League has had some weird stuff over the years, but the point is that if you look, I remember when he announced that he was going to Italy, and he puts on the sunglasses that he pulls out of his pocket, and he says ciao or whatever, and he was doing it to get a laugh from the crowd. But then he went to Italy and he learned Italian, and he work. He hustled, and I think that Inter fans appreciated him for the fact that he may not have always been the best player on the pitch, but he hustled every single game.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went to Galatasaray and he embraced it. Like he's there, like posting on Instagram in Turkish. I don't know if he speaks it, but like he's clearly become. For a Japanese player to go to Turkey and become like the mood maker of the squad, like that takes a lot. And I don't think that Kagawa is that sort of player. I don't expect it of him, and I don't think it's a bad thing that he isn't. But he's going to have to deliver on the pitch, and he's going to have to not only keep his confidence up, but if when he has a bad couple of games, hypothetically, and when he's struggling, he needs to figure out how to pick himself back up, because I think that's something that he's always had problems with, whether with the national team or with Dortmund or with Man U.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if I can make one final point about
Sure.
about how Beşiktaş looks at the Japanese market. I personally think, and I think we've had this conversation well before, back in over the summer.
Months ago, yeah.
It's dangerous because, as we've seen with other European clubs that sort of try to build a following on the back of a Japanese player,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there's a bit of, or I don't know if I should call it Eurocentrism or like Orientalization. But you can't just sort of look at Japan as like this. It's the same thing that sports leagues do with China.
Mm-hmm.
Look, they've got 1 billion people. If we can get 1% of them to follow our league, think of all the money that's going to give us. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Kagawa is but one of roughly, at this point, 15 or 20 Japanese players who are overseas,
Mm-hmm.
and many of whom are much younger than him. It's the games are in the middle of the night. We can watch on DAZN. Actually, DAZN airs the Super League, so it's quite a coup for them.
They got the rights for the Galatasaray games and now the Kagawa for Beşiktaş games. So
Yeah.
I don't think they air other games though.
No, I'm looking at their page now, and they definitely don't. And it's it's very savvy of them. Like I think that in the past, like I think of when hold on, the players' names. Yoichiro Kakitani of Cerezo Osaka went to Basel in the Swiss league,
Mm-hmm.
and such a huge deal was made of that. Like he was the young, smart, brash general marching off to war, and by God, he was going to conquer. And Skapa, Sky Perfect TV in Japan, basically our biggest satellite provider, paid a bunch of money for the Swiss League rights, and they had exclusive interview, and they were going to do a reality show following him, and he didn't play at all.
Yeah.
Like that was a huge flop, and he came back to Japan with his tail between his legs.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's good that DAZN has these rights, because I think that you don't want Skapa getting the rights, because that can always end pretty poorly.
But of course, we're talking now about Kagawa, who's an established star. And
right, Kagawa is an established star, and I think that he's probably had. I think the fact that Nagatomo is also there in Istanbul
Mm-hmm.
is a big help, because they have a very good relationship. They've basically both been fixtures on the national team since about 2009, 2010. I forget exactly when Kagawa's first senior cap was, but he narrowly missed getting picked for the 2010 World Cup, which Nagatomo was obviously in. So having
a little bit of an age gap there, I think of 2-3 years or something, but
but I mean that's like, I mean, well, the point is having a fellow Japanese player who
Mm-hmm.
you've been played dozens of games with over the last decade or so, is helpful. And I think that we see this in Germany, we see this in Belgium, we see this in France. All the Japanese players in Europe have very good relationships with each other. You have to, because I think some of these cities have very big Japanese expat communities, and with some, your only support group is your fellow players, because they are inevitably the ones who understand the struggle of being the guy in the locker room who doesn't understand what's being said. Yeah, and sure. dealing with racist fans and weird crazy travel conditions and dangerous stadiums and whatever.
We saw that a couple of years ago. I remember when what was the goalkeeper's name again? Kawasaki.
Eiji Kawashima. Yeah,
Kawashima. Sorry, and in Lierse, right. In Belgium, here in Lierse, he got racially abused. I can say though that I'm 99.9% sure that will never happen in Turkey. I'm not saying there's no racism in Turkey, but definitely not towards Japanese people or something like that. That's just
right.
There might be some racially insensitive stuff. Like I saw him being called the sushi bomber, and I was like, "What's that?"
Look, we sort of. I think that Westerners are more likely to get offended at that sort of thing than Japanese people will. Like they'll report it as like a cute, like, oh my god, this culture recognizes our culture type thing.
Yeah, I saw some stuff with their, like, for example, because we're gonna get to this, but of course Kagawa had a great debut for Beşiktaş, and there were some pictures floating around of him going into Super Saiyan mode, and to me that's just like, maybe not, but I guess...
no, they eat that shit up.
They eat it up, apparently, yeah.
They love it. Oh, God, they love that here. When Inui signed with Real Betis and they did, like, the Dragon Ball thing, or when Nakatomo went to Galatasaray, and I think they did, like, a Dragon Ball or Captain Tsubasa thing. I forget which anime they reference, but, oh, God, they love that here. Like, they love the fact that like foreign cultures and foreign football fans have such an appreciation for Japanese culture. I always love when I post photos of like Major League Soccer tifos, and it's always based on video games or sometimes based on anime, and it's always interesting to see the reaction that you get from fans who are like, oh my, like, why do they know about Final Fantasy? And why are they turning Final Fantasy into like a full pullover, tifo thing? Sometimes I have found as a nerd living here, Japanese people often do not quite appreciate how much Japanese pop culture is loved overseas, and things like that are always sort of just a nice reminder of that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, Dragon Ball Z is huge in Europe. I mean, I grew up on it. It's I'm not a huge anime fan. It's like pretty much the only anime I ever watched. Like I never got into Naruto or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But Dragon Ball Z is absolutely huge here. And Final Fantasy, of course, one of the biggest games. And if you talk about football games, there was nothing better than Konami's Pro Evolution Soccer in the early 2000s, in my opinion. Unfortunately, EA kind of raided their development team, I think, and after that, PES just hasn't been the same. Or should I say Winning 11, which was huge in Turkey. Absolutely huge. When I was a kid and I would go on vacation to Turkey, all my cousins, they were always playing Winning 11. And it was like the Japanese version,
Right.
Yeah. And so
it's actually the thing about Winning 11 is that they never included they did a version for Japan with the J League teams. Mm-hmm. Like they would do a special domestic version, but they never included the J League teams in the version that went overseas. And that was always something that I disagreed with, because I realize, like, here, how many football fans are there out there who play these games and get to, like, actually learn about players and clubs that they wouldn't know about.
Especially in the Master League setting, that was perfect for that, for finding these talents.
Right.
According to the game, and it's just fantastic. But we're getting a little bit sidetracked here, talking about Shinji Kagawa, of course. So, like you said, might be a little bit of overestimation of the maybe the potential in the market. Although I do think that, I personally think, of course, I'm biased. I'm a Beşiktaş fan, but I think if I look at the Japanese culture and I look at the values of the club, I think there's no better Turkish club than to splash into the Japanese market, because there's, I don't know how much, but honor is incredibly important in the Japanese culture, and Beşiktaş are, of course, Fenerbahce and Galatasaray fans are going to be like, oh, what is he saying? But it's true, because there's this whole stigma that Beşiktaş have, where at some point, of course, you kind of get looked at maybe perhaps more as a loser than anything. But there was our legendary president, Süleyman Seba, who was the president of the club for 16 years. And in Turkey, it's not, clubs aren't owned. It's the socio system, kind of like Real Madrid, Barcelona. So for a president to be in charge of a club for 16 years, it's a very long time. And in the mid-90s, early 90s, when Beşiktaş lost a title due to very dubious circumstances. Later, it was also revealed that there was match fixing involved and such. But Beşiktaş lost the title on the final match day, and they lost it on goal differential due to some suspicious stuff that happened. And later, more stuff came out about that. But our president said very iconic words. He said, I would rather keep our honor and finish second than win the title and be dishonored, basically. And that's a mantra that's kind of stayed with the club ever since those early 90s, and really the club has kind of been more in that sense of, and some of our fans resent this, because obviously you see your rivals win titles, and Beşiktaş win, of course, too, but not as frequently as, for example, Galatasaray, who are already on 21 titles now, and especially the past 2 decades, they've been extremely successful and surpassed us. But then you see some of our fans are like, just drop that loser mentality and just do what Galatasaray does and just, go over, win at any cost, basically, is kind of more there. Because they were the ones that we lost that title to under dubious circumstances, and their title victories over the past decades. There's been some iffy stuff, and of course Fenerbahce have had a history with some match fixing accusations and stuff like that. Not saying Beşiktaş haven't, by the way, they have had, but that's like the only smudge on the history of the club is a Turkish cup, 8 years ago or something, where there were some accusations. So I'm definitely not trying to be holier than thou here, but Beşiktaş do have this positive stigma, I guess I should say, where they are a club that holds honor in a very high regard. So I do think that in that sense that it's a club that could appeal to Japanese fans for sure. Now, I do agree with you that just signing one Japanese player isn't going to make all that much of a difference, despite the fact of how big of a star he might be. I think if this works out for Beşiktaş, he has a good 6 months, decides to stay. I think Beşiktaş probably should capitalize on that and try and get some more players. I spoke about it with Sinan as well, where we're looking for a good right back. Why not go after a guy like Sakai, for example, who would be perfect for that? Yuto Nagatomo, it's a shame that he's 32, going on 33 already. I mean, and he's one of those guys that it's very, Beşiktaş, Galatasaray, Fenerbahce fans, it's very difficult for them to like an opposition player. But a guy like Nagatomo just makes it impossible to dislike him. I've liked him since day one.
See, that's what I'm telling. He will always be. I've never really had too many favorite players on the pitch. I enjoy teams, I enjoy histories, I enjoy narratives. But if I were to ever get another uniform with proper markings and names and all that, it would have to be Yuto. He is just he's a class act. you can't not like him. I've been very lucky to chat with him in the mix zone for a couple of national team games, like friendlies over here, and he's just such a good guy, and I do think that he's one of those players. I think he'll be playing until he's 40. I think he can make it.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about how Beşiktaş should go for Sakai, are you talking about Hiroki or Gotoku?
Hiroki, the right back.
I think he's still got a few more years in France, personally.
Yeah, I think it's just an example I'm giving because I don't think it's going to be possible for us to pry him away from Marseille, unfortunately. But I think he would be one of the logical next step. But as you said as well, you alluded to it earlier, there's a lot of younger Japanese talent in Europe these days. I think there's lots of players like, of course, Nakajima is completely beyond our financial possibility, but there's other guys there in Belgium, like I said, Kamada earlier, Miroyoshi, I believe his name is, the young central defender, 20 years old, actually quite tall, very good, very talented, I think a lot of potential, and there's just lots of those young kids that are already in Europe, and there's other, of course, in the J League. We see those guys come over to Europe and they do well because of their work ethic. So I think there's definitely a potential there for that. But then you have, for example, people are saying, "Oh, this is great, Beşiktaş are going to get popular in Japan. Now they should go after a Chinese player and a South Korean player and this and that and that." But that doesn't work.
Here's the thing about Japanese fans. Mm-hmm. There is of course there are large numbers of Japanese fans who will support, they'll support the national team, and when they support the national team, I mean they support the players on the national team, and they'll loosely follow them. Mm-hmm. Then there are the fans who will support the clubs, mm-hmm. and then there are fans who support the player.
Yeah.
And I think that's a somewhat unique situation compared to Europe.
You have it here too. I mean, you have the Cristiano Ronaldo and the Lionel Messi fanboys and the Ricardo Quaresma fanboys. Trust me.
But that's like a very,
it's more obscure.
It is more like you either have to be a megastar of the Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar strata, mm-hmm. or, for example, if you're a player like Mohamed Salah, who's representing an entire nation yeah. basically. But here it's like, even within the J League, if someone, if when Shinsuke Nakamura moved to Jubilo Iwata, like, his fans moved with him. All of the Junya Ito fans at Kashiwa Reysol, they'll be supporting Henk for the next half season or however long his loan is, because now he's in Belgium.
Okay.
And it's, I'm not saying that these are. I think with Kagawa, he's enough of an established personality that, I mean, fans will follow him and fans will pay attention to his team. But for example, you don't really see that many fans of Keisuke Honda who are still tuning in to Pachuca games, mm-hmm. or AC Milan games. They're watching Melbourne Victory. So I think that this is basically turning into me giving you advice to pass to whoever about how to market Beşiktaş. I don't know if any club officials are going to listen to this podcast, but
I was just going to say, I'm not going to be passing anything on. They just have to listen if they want to.
Yeah, maybe someone listening to this is going to, can speak to someone. But what you have to do is, you have to establish a social media presence in Japanese. Mm-hmm. It's going to be based around. I'm sure they're working on that. It's going to be based around Kagawa. I'm sure that his people, probably the same people who did Dortmund stuff, are going to be working on that. Any Beşiktaş fans in Tokyo should get together and start a damn Tokyo branch of the fan club and hold events at bars and something. If you can watch the games online, you can stream it in a bar, mm-hmm. and you hold events and you sort of start to team up. Lord knows there's enough kebab places and Turkish restaurants in this city. I mean, they're not as good as they are in Istanbul, but they're passable.
Mm-hmm.
That you do it there. You get the Turkish embassy to go in on something. Turkish is it Turkish Airlines or Turkish Airways? I forget.
Airlines, yeah.
Turkish Airlines, they have a pretty sizable presence here. They used to sponsor a couple J League teams. They used to sponsor our basketball league. They might still sponsor the new basketball league, for all I know. So, like, if you get all these stakeholders in and try to push it, then maybe you get something going. I don't think that Beşiktaş fandom in Japan is ever going to rival Barcelona or Real or Manchester United, but
of course.
You can still get something going, and if you can keep them hooked, then they'll stay with you.
Yeah, I think
I always remember.
Yeah, getting a player like Kagawa is getting the foot in the door, and then you just have to. Then you just have to capitalize, and I think, for example, let's get to Kagawa's debut. There probably isn't any better scenario they could have come up with than having the first ever Beşiktaş televised match, bar, I guess, derby with Galatasaray. But the first match that's been televised in Japan to really get focused on Beşiktaş itself, it was perfect. I mean, the scenario was perfect. 6-2 victory. Kagawa coming in the 81st minute, scoring after just 19 seconds his first goal, a really nice, well-taken shot from outside of the box. And then 2 minutes later, he gets on the score sheet again. He makes it 1-5 and 1-6, and then ultimately Beşiktaş still conceded to a second goal. But for people watching that match in Japan, I'm sure that was a great introduction to the team. And of course, putting the icing on the cake, Kagawa having an absolute dream of a debut. They couldn't have really imagined it any better, and that's a perfect start, but now all the work is still yet to be done. Kagawa, of course, has to be fit into the team. I immediately had the impression that all the players were very receptive of him, very happy to have him with them. They were very genuinely happy with him. After, I don't know if you saw the post-match interview, just before he came in to have the interview post-match, Atiba Hutchinson and Adam Ljajic were being interviewed by the beIN Sports guys, and they signaled Kagawa to come over for his interview, and both Atiba and Ljajic give him this Japanese bow greeting, which is just, I think, that was just, to me, it felt genuine. It didn't feel like it was too forced. It was definitely planned. That was clear. But all the guys had smiles on their faces. They were happy. Kagawa seemed overjoyed as well. So couldn't really imagine a better start for Beşiktaş and for Kagawa if they want to conquer the Japanese market. But like you said, it's going to be a long road, and there's more to be done. But then there's this Mainichi deal that was in the beginning of the season here in Turkey. I believe it was somewhere in August that it was signed. They haven't really known what they had to do, though. They haven't really had anything to work with. But now there's Shinji Kagawa, and now they have something to work with. So when you're talking about social media and all that, Mainichi, I believe, own one of the oldest newspapers in Japan. So they definitely have a lot of reach. Do you think that the attention that's going to be paid to the Turkish league is going to drastically increase now? Of course, we already had Yuto Nagatomo, but now Kagawa, one of the bigger stars in Japanese football as well. Do you think that the league as a whole, and of course Beşiktaş, will benefit from the increased attention?
I think that Mainichi are, yes, one of Japan's biggest newspapers. There's them, there's the Asahi Shimbun, and then there's the Yomiuri Shimbun, which are those are basically the big three. I don't think Mainichi is traditionally thought of as a sports paper. I mean, they're a straight newspaper, just like in the U.S. would say the New York Times, the Washington Post. It's sort of that level. I think that obviously all of Japan's football media are going to be paying a lot more attention to the Turkish league. You could get away with just posting a quick match report about Nagatomo because it's hard. It's hard to write in match reports centering around the defender.
Yeah.
That's just sort of the nature of the beast. I don't think that you're gonna move in. Yeah, I don't think that DAZN are gonna go in for the rights for all. I don't know how many teams there are in the league. I think 18. Yeah, the first. They're not going to start to air all the games. With commentary or whatever. They're not. I think some of the wire services, Kyoto. I'm sure Kyoto News have someone in Istanbul, and if they don't have someone who can do sports in Istanbul, they might send someone else just because now you've got two players, and that's basically a quorum. Lord knows, this is a bit of industry baseball, but the Kyoto News, actually, they have someone based in Sint-Truiden who reports on all Japanese players in Belgium. So we get wire reports. Anytime one of them farts on the field, we get a quick little news story about it. And especially I think the other day, Toyokawa and Kamada both scored in the same game. So of course we get reports about that. And I think that you'll get more reports about Kagawa. You'll have our top all the famous freelance writers will be writing about him. One or two of them may actually make it out there for a game. It's tough for Japanese media to give full dedicated coverage to these sorts of leagues just because of the cost of getting reporters to those locations, and it's a very competitive market. And unfortunately, you might send a full news crew there the weekend that he is not in the squad or something like that. So there's all sorts of risks, but people will pay attention. I don't think that you're not going to get fans of people who follow the Super League religiously because Kagawa and Nagatomo are there, but people will start to pay attention to the clubs. They will start to check it out. If there's something interesting happen in the league, it will, for example, if something happens to one of Kagawa's teammates, or maybe Beşiktaş are looking for an interesting summer signing, something that didn't used to be reported would now be reported, even if it was just a short article for the web. Mm-hmm. So that's going to progress, and that's going to change a little bit, and it's going to take time to see what the impact is. But people's antennae are definitely raised, and we'll see. I think it's going to introduce the league to a lot of new people.
And let's talk a little bit more before we start really getting into the player Kagawa. And I want to end this merchandising this whole this aspect of the interview. I want to kind of finalize it. But one more thing I would like to ask you: do you think there's a potential there? Because it's definitely something the club are hoping for, major sponsorship deals with Japanese companies. Do you think that's a possibility? Kagawa, for example, he's sponsored by Adidas, of course, German brand, but Beşiktaş is also sponsored by Adidas. The contract is coming up at the end of the season, where Beşiktaş are going to probably sign a new deal with either Adidas or with a different sponsor. Could you see maybe Adidas upping the value of their offer because of Kagawa potentially staying? Could you see any Japanese companies being interested in becoming sponsors in the stadium or on the shirt or anything like that?
I don't know about a shirt sponsor.
Well, Beşiktaş are still tied in with Vodafone, so it wouldn't be main.
Sure. Which Vodafone is now here. It's now SoftBank. That's not going to change. I think that people think. It's very cliche in Europe and the rest of the world to say, oh, they just signed him to sell shirts. Mm-hmm. It's not that easy to sell shirts in Japan. Shirts are really expensive in Japan. Shirts are like 100-something euros in Japan, even J-League shirts. So I do think that if Adidas remain as the supplier, certainly it'll be much easier to get Kagawa shirts here. I can see stadium sponsorship. I can see pitch side advertising, that sort of thing. That's absolutely within the realm of possibility if he stays at the club.
Yeah.
So I mean,
That's
the start and the end of it. Yeah. If he stays at the club, you'll definitely have some companies who want to take note. You might, I mean, the fact that if Turkish Airlines does operate out of Japan, so that could be attractive to them. It's hard to say what sort of company would step up to sponsor in that sort of situation, but it's absolutely not out of the realm of possibility.
And of course, we've seen already the immediate impact of fans being at the stadium. Beşiktaş played the first game that Kagawa played was actually an away game in Antalya, and there was already a contingent of Japanese fans, also of Japanese journalists, but that was to be expected, I think. But the fans as well, that's just surprised me that there were already people going out of their way to go to Antalya. Of course, they might have coupled it with a nice vacation there, but still, coming to the stadium just to watch Shinji Kagawa's debut, that was a very, not so much surprising, because I've seen it before in Belgium with Takayuki Suzuki, who played for Genk, way back. But it's still remarkable how loyal they are, and it's something you spoke about earlier, where there's players of the fans of the players themselves. But that's perhaps something where there's a possibility as well. Maybe with working together with Turkish Airlines, organize trips. Give Turkish Airlines 500 tickets per game and let them sell them in Japan so people can come over and watch him and all that stuff. There's this rumor now. It's unconfirmed. I haven't gotten confirmation, but apparently the Japanese FA have already requested 500 tickets for the home game this weekend against Bursaspor. So that's not massive money or anything like that, but it does show that there's interest, which is definitely a potential. And in Turkey, if you look at the shirt price, you mentioned it, 100 euros in Japan. That's a lot of money. In Europe, shirts are expensive too. If you look in Turkey, they're quite cheap. I think a football shirt, 35 euros or something like that. It's a lot of money.
I went to Istanbul in 2013.
Yeah, very different though. That was like 45 back then, I think.
It was. I think I bought like a Fenerbahce Authentic for like 60 euros. That's an off. I went to a Beşiktaş basketball game, so give me some credit there. That was my sport. I did that. I went to the basketball game because I'm from Philadelphia, and I had to see Allen Iverson's former team.
Of course, yeah.
And then the next day I went to the derby against Galatasaray, and that was an incredible experience. I'd love to go to Beşiktaş game. I'd love to cover Kagawa at a game in the future.
No better time than now, though, Dan. Definitely capitalize on this.
God, I wish I had the pull to say, hey, I'm going to Istanbul. I'll be back next week. We can't all be like my boss, who was actually, he should have landed within the last few hours. He was away for 4 days to cover the Super Bowl. But enough about that. But it's. I think, not that I'm bitter or anything. As far as capitalizing on that sort of thing, you'll have. You will definitely have tour companies who will set things up. Any time that you can get a direct flight to where a star Japanese player is active. Mm-hmm. Is a good time to be a travel agent or a tour operator or whatever. Having been to that derby as a non-Turkish citizen, it's, I don't want to say rough, but it's certainly different from the J League experience. It's just the crush at the security gates and all the checks and the 3 gates that you have to go through and all that stuff, and it's intense. I loved it. It was an amazing atmosphere. But that is a bit intimidating for your average Japanese fan. So you do have to make sure that it's accessible to them. I think that if the club were to take the initiative and post info in Japanese on how to get tickets and how to go to a game,
Mm-hmm.
Like
How to
it's
get merchandise, maybe
how to
have
get
it.
merchandise if their store ships to Japan. Like if they can nail down reasonable shipping rates to
Yeah.
Japan, that would be a huge help. And if they you don't even necessarily have to offer it in Japanese because that localization is a huge pain in the ass, and I say that from professional experience. As long as it's in English, people will figure it out.
Yeah, and I mean, there's that Beşiktaş have the deal with Adidas, so it's very easy for them to just sell some Shinji Kagawa shirts in the Adidas stores in Japan. But I definitely think that if, like you said, if the shipping rate can be worked out, if that can be, if you don't have to pay 60 euros or something stupid for shipping, then why not? But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the player now. We spoke so much about all this off the pitch stuff. Shinji Kagawa's debut this past weekend, like I said already before, absolutely a dream debut for him. He gets off on the floor, not just running, sprinting like a madman. 2 goals in 9 minutes of total playing time. How well was that received in Japan? How widely was that reported? I mean, that must have been quite big news.
Yeah, it was so big that it was reported not just by the major media outlets in Japanese, but also Kyoto News had a story in English that we ran in our paper in I guess it was today's issue. That I think the news shows probably had it on TV. It was, I mean, it's a big deal. Anytime a Japanese player scores, it's a big deal. But on his debut as a sub, 2 goals in 3 or 4 minutes, it's an incredible accomplishment. And they were both pretty good goals. I mean, I would probably rate the free kick above the goal from open play, but that's just because it was a hell of a free kick, and it took a good bounce, but still a great play.
I think with the free kick, you can kind of say, "Oh, goalkeeper didn't look too good there." It was difficult, though. I mean, it was a really difficult free kick because it came from behind the wall.
You still got to hit it. You still got to hit it, and you got to hit it. And you got to get it on target.
Nasty bounce that's one of the worst things can happen for a goalkeeper is the ball dips and bounces just before it gets to you, because you basically have no chance to get it then. So that was definitely, the free kick was great, but I think the opening goal was fantastic too. He just shows some quick skill on the ball, a couple of step overs, and just slots it into the bottom left corner. Great goal from him. And not just those 2 goals, but then afterwards as well, immediately he was like a magnet on the field. All the balls seemed to go to him. He was dictating the pace for the very few minutes that was left, and he had a couple of really good passes as well. He had one really good pass into the box. I think it was onto Adriano or Larin. I don't remember exactly, but really nifty flick on the ball, and it just seemed to us immediately like we just got a gem. We got a fantastic player. I think that he's going to work really well together with Leitch, who's currently playing in the number 10 role, but he, in Italy, played a lot on the left wing. We just sold Ryan Babel to Fulham, so we were out a left winger, so that solves that problem. We just shift Kagawa to the middle, and Leitch moves out left. I think that there's a lot of potential there for a really good combination style football, something that our fans have been craving the last couple of years, because we've moved away a little bit from that, and it's something that the fans definitely miss. And he's a perfect player for that, I think. And we were talking about this before, when I said that some of our fans are saying, "Oh, let's get a Chinese player, let's get a South Korean player." And yeah, you can find great South Korean players, but I mean, I can't name a single Chinese player. And that's the thing with Kagawa. He's not just Japanese. I mean, that should not define him. He's just a fantastic football player that I think any club at our level would be happy to have, because, I mean, I'm not going to say he's world class. I'm not a Premier League fan who calls all their new transfers a world class player, but he's probably just a level below that, which still makes him an amazing football player. I think it's a great get for us. I really I know that a lot of my fellow fans were extremely disappointed to hear the news. There's not an option to buy. Fortunately, there has this news kind of came out that it's really down to Kagawa. If he decides after these 6 months, I want to stay, Dortmund are probably not going to do anything to stop him. Even if they have a better offer from elsewhere, it's really all down to him. And,
and that tends to be how it is. Especially, I think that's what a lot of Japanese players are sort of used to in a way. Even in Japan, the idea of multi-year contracts is a relatively new concept. Most players actually will renew annually, and that's sort of a problem not just with the state of mind of the players, but also agents here have way more power than they should. I know that's true of more or less any country. But look, I've got the game on silent as recording. Just the touch and the casualness with which he slots home that first goal. You can't beat it. Like, he's confident and he's happy and he's smiling, and we haven't really seen that from him since the World Cup, and before that we hadn't really seen it from him in the previous few months. With Dortmund, he'd run hot for half a season and then run cold for half a season, and I think if the fans treat him well, if the club treats him well, if the city treats him well, I don't see why he wouldn't want to stay, because in the end, I don't want to begrudge him the chance to if he wants to play in Spain and if that's his ambition, that's his right. He's a player should have the ambition to go wherever he wants to, but I think at his age, like, if it's working, you got to do it. Like, if you're in a good place, you shouldn't throw it out for a dream that might not pan out, and might even cost you one of the few years of high level football that you have left in your career.
I mean, we Mario Gomez, who I'm sure you're familiar with, former Bayern Munich striker, former Germany striker. He just said in an interview, he was asked about if he regrets moving to Fiorentina, because that was a huge bomb for him, and he said, "No, I don't, because that led to me spending that year at Beşiktaş, which was one of the highlights of my career, just because of the experience." And I think he really regrets not staying after past that season. Of course, he had the perfect season, but still, I think he really regrets it. And for him, it's for a player of that magnitude, won the Champions League, everything like that, to say that was one of the highlights of his career. That's something, I think. And that's the thing with Kagawa. I think he's not old, because he's still 29 for a couple months. In Turkey, we're used to getting older players as well. Turkey isn't really that what people think it is anymore, where there's just over the hill past stars coming. There's plenty of really good, like, look at Adem Ljajic, for example. 26, 27 years old, had a fantastic career in Serie A, one of the players that a lot of Serie A fans just love to watch, because he's great. And then look at Miha Zajc, who came from Empoli to Fenerbahce this past window, 24, 25 years old. There's plenty of younger talent that comes to Turkey as well. Of course, you have the guys like Drogba, who come at the tail end of their careers but still have a great time there, and guys like Robinho and Roberto Carlos and those types of names that come in their late 30s. But I think Kagawa is still young enough for the team to be built around him for the coming 2 to 3 years if he decides to stay. And I think him, Ljajic, could be a really good partnership in midfield. There's not really much we can say, I think, about the qualities of the football player Shinji Kagawa. I think it's more whether or not you think that he can settle, and do you think that if he is made important, if it's being made clear for him, look, you're gonna be our key player alongside this guy and this guy, perhaps, you and 2 other guys are gonna be the key for the foreseeable future. Do you think that will bring the best out in him?
I think it can. if I had anywhere near the athletic prowess required to become a pro football player of that caliber, if you're asking me, like, do you want to retire? Probably not retire, but do you want to spend 3 or 4 years being being the leader and being the core of our team in Turkey, or do you want to try, playing for maybe a lower mid-table Spanish team? Sure, you get to line up against Messi, 2 or 3 times a year, but really that's it. Like, that's as high as your career is going to go. You're not getting back into the Champions League. You're not getting back into the Europa League even. I take Turkey, and I think that Nagatomo, if he had really wanted, he could have played somewhere. He could have played for another team in Italy, if he wanted. But clearly, he saw something attractive enough in Galatasaray to make the move over there, and it worked for him. And the same thing could happen with Kagawa. I think it's way too early to make that judgment call, but the possibility is there. So we're just going to have to see how he performs over the next 4 months, how he deals with less than adverse circumstances. I think if coming in with a 4-1 lead, it's pretty easy to look good. I think once he earns his first start, once he plays against some of the tougher teams, once if Beşiktaş can even get involved. I mean, they're 11 points back.
Yeah.
In the how many Champions League spots does Turkey have?
Just the one that directly qualifies, and then another one that has to play playoffs. The title is pretty much out of the question this season for us. We've just had too many. We just haven't been good this season. Honestly, it's time to rebuild this team. And I think guys like Laiç, Kagawa, if he stays, and younger guys like Kaan, there's this changing of the guard going on right this summer, and this season is kind of the changing of the guard. We've had an incredible 2 to 3 years where we won back-to-back titles, finished the Champions League group stages unbeaten, won the group, first Turkish club to ever win the group, finish a group as leader in the Champions League, do so unbeaten, for the first time in the club's history to get out of the group stages, which was for a long time one of the sour notes of our history. But yeah, we just had 2 or 3 amazing years, and now is this decompression. It already kind of started last year despite the amazing Champions League campaign, and now there's just this changing of the guard. It's time for a new generation. I don't think the coach will stick around past this season. I don't think he should either, but I think that whoever comes in, if Kagawa stays, Kagawa will be an important player going forward, no doubt.
I think that in Japan there is a very strong importance placed on the idea of you have to want to play for the Premier League. You have to want to play in the Premier League. You have to want to play for a Champions League team. You have to want to play for a title contender. We talked about this, I think it was off the air, about Shoya Nakajima and his decision to go to Qatar for basically a gigantic pile of money.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough because I think that when the players are put under so much pressure to do what they are told is the right thing to do, either by agents or by fans or whatever, they can get stuck in a weird spot. And I think that happened with Kagawa when he went to United.
Yeah.
He was obviously, I think he arrived in Manchester when they were just embarking on their biggest transition away from Sir Alex Ferguson.
Yeah.
So
that's massive, of course. Yeah.
And that was bad timing for him. That was very unfortunate timing for him. I think that if Sir Alex was there, maybe things would have gone better. if he was there for longer. I think he might have had a season or half a season. I forget, or maybe not. But
I think it might have been his last season. I'm not
sure. So that's tough, and it's. I think, but like looking at the footage from over the weekend, it's like he's happy.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, it looks like are those black kits? Are those the home kit, or is that
those are the away kits? But I think they should be the home kits because they're absolutely stunning.
They're gorgeous. Those are some good kits. Turkey has some really good uniforms, which is of course the quality I look for first and foremost when deciding which teams I want to support.
I'll send you one.
I appreciate it. I've got the scarf and I'll have the kit to go with it. I hope he can pull it off. I just think that he's always the playmaker, but there's always just so much pressure on him to make these plays along with Honda, and so there were the questions like, I think Honda always wanted to be like the central attacking midfielder. Mm-hmm. And so, Kagawa can play out, sort of on the wing or sort of on, to either of Honda's sides, but the partnership there was never greater than the sum of its two parts, at least not consistently.
Yeah.
So if he can create a lasting partnership that with his teammates, and if he can, as long as he can communicate and as long as he feels confident enough, I don't know how Turkish football media treat athletes, not just sort of in general, but I don't know how they're going to go at him as a foreign player. But
I think that the fact that he's Japanese is probably going to be an advantage for him. I think he's generally going to be treated really well. I mean, if you read Turkish media right now as well about him, of course he had a perfect debut, but still, I mean, full of praise and only. Even before he made his debut, I think many of the pundits said, this is a great get for Beşiktaş. He's a fantastic player. He's going to add a lot of quality that they probably have been lacking this season. And I think him and Laiç could be fantastic. Maybe compare Laiç a little bit to Honda, but he's gonna play out left probably because that's more natural for him as well. And great free kick taker, a little bit of a bad boy image, but I just think the chemistry with him and Adriano, him and Medel was already immediately there, and just to see his fellow players embrace him straight away. And like you said, I mean, he was smiling from the get-go. Even before the match, he was already smiling, posing with Ilhan Mansız, who some of the J-League fans may remember from his brief stint at Vissel Kobe. Of course, he was...
That's a deep cut. How many years ago was that? Jeez.
2004. So that's a long time ago. He is, of course, a Beşiktaş legend. Currently on the coaching staff, one of the assistant coaches. And he, of course, garnered fame in Japan on the 2002 World Cup, where he had the samurai haircut, which immediately endeared him to the entire nation of Japan, it seemed like. And of course, he has some resemblances. He has more Asian facial features, I think, which also helped that perhaps. But yeah, I mean, Kagawa, great player. I think it's a great get, and it's gonna be so important for Beşiktaş fans now because, like I said, with the Mario Gomez thing, he had a fantastic season with us, but then he didn't stay, and that really left a nasty feeling in the Beşiktaş fans' mouth, so to speak, where they just they wanted nothing more for him to stay, and then it didn't happen. And it kind of was like a relationship ending with a girlfriend you absolutely loved, and she was your goddess, so to speak.
And it wasn't you, it was her. And then she, emails you a year later, and she says, "I made a mistake, but you've already started your new life somewhere else, and you're never going to get that magic back." And I totally. Appreciate that, and it's I wish him. I think we all wish him the best. I think Japanese media would love nothing more than for Kagawa to succeed, because he is still among his sponsors. I mean, a big name and a huge moneymaker. I would say, if he gets his form back over the next year or so, you're going to start to hear his name pop up as a possible overage candidate for the Olympics.
Okay.
I think that Honda has come out and said he wants to be on the Olympic side.
But how likely is that still? That's playing in Australia nowadays.
You know what? Pretty good. Honda's still he's still got it. He's doing really well in Melbourne, and he's sort of hyper-focused enough that he can do it. Kagawa, I mean, it really depends. I mean, I think if Kagawa wanted to do it and he was in good form, what Moriyasu has to decide there is, do I take away a spot at midfield that could be used for one of our developing midfielders? Or do I give it to Kagawa for one last go at international glory? That's a tough question. I think that Moriyasu would probably prefer to stick with youth.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Olympics are under 23, right? And then 3 players that are allowed to be older than 27 or something like that. Or
it's under 23, but 3 players can be overage. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think. I mean, if from a little bit of a more biased perspective, I think that a guy like Kamada deserves to get his chance at that glory. He's the perfect age.
You'll get Kamada, you'll get Tomiyasu, you'll probably get Toyokawa, Takefusa Kubo, he's actually here at FC Tokyo for another half year, but he was with Barcelona's youth academy until the FIFA ruling against them, and they had to basically get rid of all of their. Yeah, so
I was supposed to ask you about him.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a good thing I brought that up. No, as soon as he turns 18, he's absolutely bound to be back in Europe.
Do you think he'll go back to Barca, or?
I've heard. I mean, he hasn't really he's played a bit in the J League, but he's still really small, and he still gets pushed around fairly easily. And I don't quite think he's ripe yet. I think he still needs to be in the oven for a bit longer. I mean, we'll see. I'm eager to see how he does this season. But it could be Barca, it could be PSG. There are some rumors to that regard. You know what? If Beşiktaş want to really do, I don't know if it counts as a power move, but I think that there are few experiences that could be more formative to an 18-year-old than playing Europa League football in Turkey.
Or Champions League. Who knows?
Or Champions League. You've definitely got the chance. I mean, you're only 3 points back of Gala, so still plenty of time to make up that gap, but you never know. I think that what Kubo needs over the next 2 years is to play as much as goddamn possible. That boy needs minutes, that boy needs starts. And not just starts for the reserves or the under-18s. You look at what,
competitive matches.
You look at what Mbappe did. He can't, I don't think he's even old enough to drink in Russia, and he won France the damn World Cup, practically.
Yeah, for sure.
That's just, it's the standard in Japan. You don't have young players getting thrown out there under such difficult circumstances.
It's the same in Turkey.
So it's rough.
And if you look at, for example, how they do it in Holland, in the Netherlands, at Ajax, where as soon as you basically hit 18, and if you're good enough to play, if they think you're ever going to be good enough, you're going to get minutes in that first team, and that's so important for those formative years. I think between the age of 18 and 21, it's about playing as many matches as you can possibly do. I think before that, if you're 16, 17, training with the senior squad, that's enough. It's good. You get to play. Get to train with some great players, probably, if you're at a big club, and you get to learn from them in training. But then when you're 18, 19 years old, you need to play. You need to play consistently. So I think it's better for those guys to either go out on loan rather than stay and sit on the bench and maybe get 10 minutes here and 5 minutes there. Playing time is so important for those young guys. So you already mentioned Kubo, but is there anyone else that maybe, if Beşiktaş are really serious about making a splash in Japan, are there any players that come to mind where you think, that might be an interesting option for a club like Beşiktaş?
I think, let's see, if you're talking about sort of younger players, one name that came up, he had a very good year, was Hidemasa Morita, midfielder at Kawasaki. He was actually selected for the Asian Cup squad, but he had to pull out because of an injury. I think that could be a good shout. I'm trying to think of who else. Hirotaka Mita is maybe a bit too old to be going overseas. Like, I think it's for some players. There's a point. I mean, Mita is 28, and he's a very good central midfielder. But I think with Japanese players, like if you don't get him out the door, by the time they're 24, 25, it's too late to do anything with them. But he's solid, and actually he's had his poor supporters who have bought his uniforms, because last year he gave up the number 8 to Andres Iniesta, and he took the number 7. And then David Villa showed up, and he had to give up the number 7, and now I think he's number 14. Just brutal.
So now Jordi Cruyff will show up and he'll take it.
You know what? Considering the amount of money that Vissel are dropping on players, you never know. Like, God, they're throwing out money like a Qatari team. It's
yeah, they can maybe get Guti out of retirement since they have the Spanish contingent anyway, and he'll get number 14.
You know what? Turn 3 times and spit, because if you don't, it'll actually happen. I mean, there's so many.
He's also on the coaching staff, by the way, at Beşiktaş, Guti. Didn't know that yet.
Probably did not. Yeah, I'm gonna have to learn a lot about the team if Kagawa's name is gonna keep popping up.
Well, you know where you can get the information.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to think that there's always, like, this winter we actually had so many promising, like, so many interesting signings in terms of Japanese players. Like, you had a Gen Shoji going to France, and I think that's a very good signing.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've really been under the impression the last year or two maybe that the Japanese footballers in Europe seem to be booming. Like, I don't think there ever have been more than there currently are. Or is that just a false impression I have?
It's close to the peak. If it isn't the peak, it's very close to the peak. We had a bunch. We had Shuichi Gonda went to Portmonense, which I mean, okay. You had Koi Takara, who was signed by Manchester City and then loaned to Groningen, which is where Ritsu Doan is playing. You have all the players in Belgium. You have all the players in Germany, of course. You still have Maya Yoshida in England. You've got one or two players. You've got Shoji and Sakai in France. Probably trying to think of what other countries have like decent. What's his face? Takashi Inoue is still in Spain,
Betis, yeah.
which hasn't really. Yeah, no, he moved to. He moved. He
Did
was
he?
loaned. Yeah, because he wasn't playing at all at
Yeah,
Betis.
he wasn't playing a lot. I was surprised by that because it was I thought it was going to be a big move at the start of the season. I didn't realize he was 30 though. I thought he was like
Yeah.
25, 26.
That's the problem. He just peaked late for the national team.
Mhm.
He did well at Eibar, or Eibar,
Great.
and
It was amazing at the World Cup. It was
yeah, and he was amazing at the World
fantastic.
Cup. And then he moved to Betis and just never came together. Now he's at Alaves,
Granted,
which is where he landed.
Betis are very. They have such a great team.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's
very competitive.
tough.
But all of us are doing well too.
They're like fifth in the league or something. It's going to be interesting. I think the question is going to be like where, especially as more J League players sign these sort of big name foreign players.
Mm-hmm.
The question is whether or not there's going to be a room for the sort of the younger domestic players and where they can go. If you look at, I think you look at the average age of all the players who went overseas, it's got to be like Gonda excluded. It's mostly late teens, early 20s. I mean, Itakura isn't that old. Itakura is 22. Doan, who has been in Holland for a year, is only 20. We had a goalkeeper actually who was on Kashiwa Rachel's youth team. Has joined Braga, I think it was, on like a full it was either a loan or a full transfer. It was either of those two. But like, there's some interesting moves happening. You had there was a weird one from Kashiwa. Yuta Nakayama, the defender, is going to Holland for Zwolle. PEC Zwolle.
Yeah.
Zwolle.
Pick Swallow.
Yeah,
I was really surprised as well by just looking at Tomiyasu that he was just 20 years old. I think that's going to be, I don't know, I think it's going to be a great star for Japanese football. Of course, he's a central defender. So.
Japan desperately needs central defenders. I mean, I love my Yoshida, but he's not getting any younger.
And his height.
Yeah. And he's, I mean, Japan's golden age of central defenders has sort of come and gone. Mm-hmm. Masato Morishige is unfortunately never going to get back into the national team picture. And you need tall, big players. You need that like Tulio, like Yuji Nakazawa. And right now we're not making those. Honestly, if Beşiktaş can create some starting national team goalkeepers for Japan, we'll send all our goalkeepers over there because that's probably our weakest. That's probably goalkeeping is probably Japan's weakest position.
Send them to Belgium. I think that's probably one of the best leagues to develop in.
That's our worst position at the moment, and I think central defense. Honestly, it's the back line is probably going to be like Shoji and Tomiyasu at central defender, and whoever Sei Midoya might be on the right side, and I think Nagatomo's still got a couple more years left.
I think so too.
Yeah, so
injuries.
It's definitely, we're not seeing as many players go to prestige leagues. Not as many players going to top 4 leagues, and some colleagues believe that that's not good, like that it sort of shows that the quality of Japanese players is declining. But
I think if you can play regularly and you can steal the show, like for example Nakajima did at Portimonense, and if I'm sure that people will be listening to this and they'll be like, who the hell are these guys talking about? But Nakajima, really impressive last season in Portugal. I think he had like 10 assists and 11 goals or something as a left winger. He's only one. He's like a really small, 1 meter 64 or something tall winger, but I mean, so skilled, such a great talent. And I think, if you can break through in a league like Portugal, you definitely have something in you. You don't necessarily have to go to the top 5 in Europe straight away. I think you can go to Holland, you can go to Belgium, you can go to Portugal, and grow there, and then make that next step in your career.
Yeah, and sure. I think that the Bundesliga is still a reliable starting league for a Japanese player.
Yeah, and like you see now with Kamada, I think he's owned by Frankfurt. I'm sure he'll go back there.
Yeah,
and
I mean, so many Japanese players have gotten have built their careers in Germany. And so I don't think that necessarily. I don't think that players should be driven away by there. But I just don't think that they shouldn't be trying to push their agents to land them deals in England that aren't going to go through because they can't get the visa or whatever. Like Yosuke Ideguchi to Leeds was probably the dumbest thing that happened in Japanese football last year.
Mm.
Was it last year? Was it a year ago? I don't remember. Nobody cares about him anymore.
He's not relevant anymore.
He's not relevant because he's been injured. But he scored. He went from scoring that rocket against Australia in World Cup qualifying to falling off the face of the earth. And it's a shame, but his agent pressured him into a thing.
Yeah. You need to go somewhere where you're gonna get the playing time, and I think you can see it in Belgium right now with all those great and the journalists here in Belgium are raving about those guys. The football that they're playing at St. Alban is great. Those kids are they're still kids because 20, 22 years old. I mean, for you and I, Dan, those are kids.
Yeah,
and they're doing great.
No,
and I love how this has totally turned into just a
general podcast about
Japanese football. But I think that's great.
As it sort of usually ends up being. Look, as far as Hintruden are concerned, when DMM bought the team and started to set things up, I thought it was going to be one of those weird vanity projects that Japanese owners are so apt to do that never really realizes its potential.
Mm-hmm.
But full credit, they're produced. Those kids are getting minutes, and those are real non BS minutes. They're getting it done. It's not
yeah, for sure.
What was that Spanish club? CE Sabadell, who were in the second division. I don't know if they still are, but they had a Japanese CEO, and who was it? Sultan Tanabe went there on loan for 2 or 3 seasons from FC Tokyo, and he just couldn't get anything done. He was playing, but nobody gave a shit. Gosh, see, the only reason I can say all this is because it's I know that his agent isn't going to be looking up a podcast on Turkish football to hear what I'm saying. It doesn't matter.
Be careful! I'll tag him on Twitter.
You know what? I don't think he left FC. I don't think FC Tokyo re-signed him this season. I don't even know where he ended up. He's obviously Fukuoka. Now I'll never see him again. You get these players who have this Europe at any cost fixation, and they get themselves into a stupid thing as a result.
Yeah,
and it just it's a shame. But
you see it a lot with young players too. I mean, you just need to, for example, we had this at the beginning of the season where Fenerbahce, they signed a bunch of young, promising Turkish players. And the thing about Fenerbahce is they have never been a club that develop youth. They've always been a buyer club, and you just know going into this, even now that they have a new president. So I was kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt. I was like, yeah, okay, I was talking to one of the fathers of one of those players, and I was like, I mean, yeah, with this new president, it might be a good thing, but then 6 months later, the guy has played maybe 6 minutes or something, and you just know that he made the wrong choice, and you just know that they know too, that they're we should have known, and that's just so important when you make that move. Instead of going to a big league straight away, a big club, big name club, take that first step and go to a team where you'll actually get playing time, where you'll be allowed to make some mistakes, where you'll be allowed to learn and develop, and then take that next step. That once you're established and you have a name, then you can take that next step to a big club. But don't ever go to it, for example, like Manchester City or Chelsea. If you're a really promising young player, don't go there, because you won't get any chance. Look at Kevin De Bruyne, look at Romelu Lukaku, look at Thibaut Courtois. They all had to be sent out on loan before they ever got a look. And even then, Thibaut Courtois had to basically play the Champions League final before Chelsea ever considered him. Kevin De Bruyne, he's one of the best players in the world right now, and look at his career trajectory. Went at a very young age to Chelsea, never got a chance, ended up in Germany. Now he's a star at Manchester City. I think it's just, you just have to learn to walk before you run. And I think that's the truth for not just Japanese players, but young players in general. Don't try to make that really big move to that huge club straight away, unless you're the next Messi, of course. But yeah. End rant. But just one more thing I wanted to ask you, Dan, before we end the podcast, and that was about Kagawa. Really, at the start of the season, he did say, "I'm looking for a new challenge." So, were you surprised that when Hannover came in at the last minute as well, that he opted not to stay in the Bundesliga? Was that at all surprising to you?
No, because honestly, I think that if he had wanted to, maybe this is rude to Hanover fans listening, if he wanted to settle for Hanover, he would have made that decision in August. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that as a player, if he wanted to go to Spain, he saw that as a step up. Mm-hmm. And if he wanted a step up, it means that he still thinks his career has an upward trajectory. So if you're in that position, you either have to think of it as, you have to look for a lateral move or a move or an upward move. I don't think Hanover from Dortmund is either. Like, it's a step down. It's a step down. I think once you take that step down, you're always going to take steps down. So maybe he sees Beşiktaş as a lateral.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you're going from a title contender to a title contender, so in that regard, I mean, definitely in terms of league quality, it's a step down. I mean,
sure.
Call a spade a spade. No need to sugarcoat that, but I mean,
I think that Turkey is still top 10 in Europe. I mean,
for sure,
yeah. So look, he needs minutes, and I think that if he leaves, he's been with Dortmund for so long. Like, I think it's sort of a sign of respect that he would rather play somewhere else, play in another country, than join another team in the league. Like, it'd be weird to watch him play for Hanover. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, so I think that if I were him, if I had convinced myself that I want to go to a new country and challenge myself, then that's what I'm going to do. If Spain isn't going to work, then I'm going to look at other options. He was clearly lucky enough to have found this one.
Do you think he was holding out for a move to Sevilla in the summer?
Probably. I mean, if Sevilla had made an offer, you'd be foolish to not have taken it. I don't know how much of a possibility that was. I remember some rumors about it, but
yeah,
he had a very good World Cup, but I don't know. I guess it just wasn't enough to get him a big contract elsewhere.
That's what I think, though. I mean, he had a good World Cup, and then he didn't really move in the summer, and I think everyone knew that his story at Dortmund was over. It was written. I mean, mutual respect between both parties. Dortmund love him. He loves Dortmund, of course, but it was clear that his era at Dortmund had ended, and that it was time. Look at Nuri Sahin. I mean, same generation. They both came up together, and Nuri also knew this is the end. I have to go. I have to move, and he moved. And Kagawa probably was planning on moving to in the summer, but that didn't happen. I think it was because he was holding out for that move to Spain. Then this window, Monaco came knocking. That didn't materialize. Do you have any information on why that didn't happen? Does it have to do with the Henry termination?
That was, I mean, Monaco was never really reported seriously here. I don't think it was ever really in the cards. I mean, there might have been something, but I don't.
Because here it was. I mean, L'Equipe was adamant that it was happening, and then it didn't, and then they said, well, it broke down. But when I say here, I mean Europe, of course.
Sure. I don't know. I think that was always sort of a non-starter. Like, and I don't think. I don't know what his. I don't know what what he would have gotten out of going to a team that's in that precarious a position.
Yeah. Wouldn't. Do you think that this is, given the options he had, that this is the best possible career move he could have made? Or do you think that maybe a move to, let's say, an Eibar in Spain or Alaves or something would have maybe been better?
I mean, I've got colleagues who are very bullish on Spanish football and the Spanish league, but quite frankly, this is, I mean, as someone who watches the European leagues with a very detached lens, it's just not interesting to me if the same 3 or 4 teams are always going to win it. Like, the fact that the league's so dominated by, your Barcelona and Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid,
Really
and sometimes you'll get really just the 2. What's there to play for?
True. Yeah.
Like,
unless you play for those two teams, of course.
Right, unless you play for those 2 teams. Like, what's there to play for? Like, maybe, your Champions League or Europa League. Maybe, an upset in the Copa del Rey. I personally would be more attracted to a new project, something with real challenges, and I think that's what Kagawa's been given. Yeah, I'd much rather be in that position over where Monaco are now, 3rd from the bottom.
And what's the perception in Japan regarding the move? Because I know there's a lot in Belgium that there's a lot of they look kind of down their noses when it comes to Turkish football, the Turkish league, and all that. And I wonder if that's the same case in Japan, because I know it's in many European countries it kind of is like they kind of look down their noses when it comes to Turkey.
I don't think that Turkish football has enough of a reputation, positive or negative, for that to happen here. But I think that the media, in their role as cheerleaders, as they so often tend to be, are very supportive of Kagawa as a player, and they want him to do well. Like they, I'm looking at Nikon Sports, which is one of the biggest sports papers in the country, and of their top 3 stories for international football, number 1 is Salah's plane. Number 2 is Kagawa. Oh, it's about Kagawa visiting Yuto Nagatomo and having dinner at his place. Yeah. Number 3 is Yuto Nagatomo talking about Kagawa visiting his place and having dinner. Number 4 is also it's Yuto. It's Nagatomo talking about
welcoming him.
It's him talking about Kagawa's 2 goals, and he said, I
never knew you had that kind of curve or something, right?
Basically, he actually says, like, if you can kick the ball like that, why didn't you say something? And about how he's happy to be in the same city as Shinji and to be able to play his rivals. And he says it's like something he couldn't have even dreamed of.
It's quite remarkable, though, to see that even in the summer that Nagatomo was kind of cheerleading him on and telling him, like, hey, it's great here, come over here. And I think he even said something in the lines of course I'd prefer you to come to Galatasaray and play with me, but if you're gonna come, it's great. And
I think it's great for them to be in the same league. And as I said earlier, it's good for for Kagawa as he adjusts to this this new culture. It's absolutely going to be a culture shock, even for someone who's lived overseas as long as he has. To have a Japanese friend there who understands what's what, and to help him get through that. And I think that now it's Nagatomo's turn to be the veteran, to be the senior in the relationship, and because I mean Nagatomo's always been older, obviously, but he's
come later to Europe.
He's the defender. He's he only beat Kagawa to Europe by like maybe half a year. He went. Nagatomo went over after the 2010 World Cup.
Oh, okay.
I
think Kagawa was like 22 or something.
Yeah, it was like Kagawa went in like early 2010 or like maybe I think it might have been the summer of 2010 before the World Cup. Because he had a great half season at Dortmund before the Asian Cup, and then he got injured.
He did.
Yeah,
2010 was his first season there. Yeah.
Right. So that'll be good for him. I think they'll. The kids are going to be fine. Like, as long as Kagawa can keep this up, I don't expect him to score two goals every game. But
no. Yeah. I don't think anyone expects this. It's just people just want him to help the team play good football, and he doesn't need to be scoring every game. Of course, that's not what we expect. No offense, we're not Americans. We don't expect her. I remember when what was his name? Nigel de Jong, when he left MLS when he left the MLS, there was this official video from the MLS, and it was really talking like he's a defensive midfielder, and it was like they seemed shocked that he didn't score a single goal or something. It's like he only, or maybe one, or something like he only scored one goal, or it was like they were really, I don't know, it's like expected, I don't know what it was. It just felt so weird. So I don't think that's the case. We don't expect him to keep this up. I mean, can only go downhill from here, right?
Well, I mean, gosh, I hope not.
I hope not. No, I mean. And it's one of those things as well. In his post-match interviews, he was just so modest, as you already said. He's a modest guy, and he said I was, first and foremost, I think he said something along the lines of, it was just, I just very lucky today. It was luck, and I'm so happy, and all that, and and he did say, the fans, the coach, the players, they all show me so much respect, and that's very important to me. And I think it's going to help him settle, honestly. I think him immediately having some players that he can relate to. There's been many pictures already coming out of him in training, just seeming to get along really well with Gary Medel, the Chilean international. I just have the feeling that everything's going smooth right now for him. Hopefully it continues like that. And hopefully he can be important for the Japanese national team too, and for Beşiktaş, of course. And like I said before, for Beşiktaş fans, it's really... Beşiktaş fans want to love Kagawa, they want to embrace him, but they don't want to have this feeling of, I'm going to be left in 5 months and I'm going to be, another perfect girlfriend that leaves me hanging like Mario Gomez. And unfortunately, Beşiktaş fans have encountered that sort of pain in the last couple of years quite a few times, with first Gomez, then Abubakar, who had a great season and went back to Porto, then Talisca, who had 2 great seasons, then went to China. And it's just, those were all loan deals, and they all had an option to buy, and none of them ended up staying, because in the case of Abubakar and Talisca, we didn't have the financial means. In the terms of Gomez, there was the coup in Turkey, the attempted coup in 2016 that really put off Gomez's family, which ultimately made him decide to go back to Germany, even though he still had the ambition to play Champions League football. And I think if it wasn't for that poor timing of that political unrest in Turkey, that he definitely would have stayed, and things could have been different. But yeah, I think that's just one of those things for Beşiktaş fans right now. It's they want to embrace and love Kagawa and want to grow attached to him, want to put him on a pedestal and see him as one of the big stars of the team going forward, and want to imagine him being someone the team is going to build around in the coming years, and he's going to be great for the club. And I think they're all just fearful that we're gonna basically act like a training camp for him. He's gonna do well, get in form for 6 months now with Beşiktaş, and then maybe go to Spain and leave us behind him. And that's kind of what I sense the feeling is among many of the fans, that they're really fearful for that to happen. But personally, I think if like you said, if the experience can be positive for Kagawa, I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to stay.
I think that if Beşiktaş get into Champions League qualifying, I mean, ideally Europa League, but even better if they have a shot at the Champions League, I think that he would rather stay there than go to, Spanish mid-table. I think that that's probably the key, especially quite frankly, I think DAZN has the Champions League from this season. Mm-hmm. If they can broadcast him in the Champions League, of course maybe they'll even sponsor Beşiktaş and start DAZN Turkey. I don't think Turkey has DAZN yet, but
no, we don't. No.
It's all possible. It's gonna, we'll have to see how it goes. But like you, I'm optimistic. I think that, look, if he hears his name being chanted from behind the goal every game, if the fans embrace him, if the players embrace him, then he'll embrace them back.
And that's a perfect note to end our episode on. Dan, domo arigato. Thank you very much for giving us this interview. And you know what? I hope in 4 or 5 months at the end of the season, when Kagawa announces his decision to stay at Beşiktaş, I hope we can do another episode and maybe reflect on his first 6 months at the club and how it would look to go forward. So I really hope he'll be willing to come on again. But Dan, please plug your social media stuff. So
sure.
Where to find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Aishiteru Tokyo, AISHITERUTOKYO. You can find my stuff appearing on the Japan Times. To follow us for our sports coverage at JT_sports, SPORTS. Or there's just at Japan Times, and I look forward to having the opportunity to write about if Kagawa succeeds in Istanbul, if he takes Turkish football by fire. There's nothing that feels better than to be able to write about a Japanese player who has succeeded overseas. It's tough. I think we love watching players go. We hate to see them struggle, and I hope that Beşiktaş can be the right environment for him to succeed, because as a player, he certainly deserves it.
And I think Beşiktaş have proven over the years that they are a really great environment for guys like, for example, Mario Gomez or Abubakar and different Talisca to kind of breathe some fresh air into their careers and revitalize, especially in the case of Gomez. So, and the difference is perhaps that if this happens for Kagawa, there might be a greater sense of, especially from Japan, but also from maybe Kagawa himself, of, maybe I owe it a little bit to stick around and see where this takes me. Where I think with Gomez and Germany, and it was always kind of like, oh, he revitalized his career, good, now come back to the Bundesliga and see, prove that you can do it there too. But looking forward a lot to the next 14 or so games in the Turkish league, and hopefully, I'm really hopeful that Kagawa starts this weekend against Bursaspor already. I think there's no reason not to, unless he's not 100% fit, but I think he can play 60 minutes for sure. He hasn't played much this season yet, but no reason not to start him, I think, after that amazing start against Antalyaspor on the weekend. So I hope you'll be watching, Dan.
I hope I will too. Let's see, that game kicks off. I'm looking it up now. What time will that be? Sunday at 1 a.m. here. So we'll see. I might stay up late. Might get up early and catch the replay because it'll be on DAZN streaming here. And yeah, I think that a lot of fans. That's pretty good timing because it means all the fans waking up on Sunday morning will see how he did one way or the other, and hopefully they have something good to wake up to.
Definitely fingers crossed for Beşiktaş and Shinji Kagawa on this weekend against Bursaspor, of course. Dan, once again, domo arigato. Thank you very much for giving us this interview. And thank you for listening to the Black Eagles podcast, and we'll be back soon.